Hi guys, and in this video we're going to be looking at how to make a financial analysis template. Okay, so although in the later part of our course we would be making the template anyways in the model, but it's good to know how do you actually create that so that at that time it will not be a new concept that you're learning, right? So I'm going to start with very basic stuff. Okay. So first and foremost is let's talk about the orientation of your cells. Okay. Since imagine your financial statements numbers coming in every year, right? So that means your years are going to go horizontal to the right, and your various line items or whatever your particulars or details will be vertical, right? Hence it's always a good idea to think about the orientation of your model first and then look at creating the template. All right, so first and foremost you try to create a space where you can actually talk about what this model is about, right? So let's say I'm making a model on Reliance Industries, right, so I just mentioned that as the first information. The second information I will talk about is what will be my currency and my units. Right. So the next thing to mention is all data in, whether you're using millions, right? Millions INR, or if you're using millions dollar, right? Depending upon which currency you're dealing with, you could mention that. So I'm going to mention right now all data in millions INR, right? The third thing that you want to mention in this section out here is what will be the colors that will be used and what do they signify, right? But I'm going to leave that till the end because we have not reached there. And then after setting the color, then we will come back to, you know, putting that information out here. All right. So after that, you always try to leave two columns, okay, and you don't do any calculations right away. The reason is sometimes you want to put some assumptions out here which you can just link, and that time you don't want to right click and put an insert function, put an insert column out there, right? So this should be readily be thought about, right? So if let's say I was talking about revenue, right? So let's say I was talking about revenue, and if you had not put in this column and you had directly started calculating, and now you wanted to put an assumption that the revenue will grow by 20%, you won't have any place to write. So it's always good, a safe thing to do is just to keep two columns, so that you can play around with these calculations. In fact, you can even hide this, right? Just select these two columns and hide it, but make sure that you always leave two columns minimum for some assumptions which you might have to take, right? So that's the reason why we keep those two columns open, right? The next is to put in the date, okay, and the year separately. The reason why we keep date and year separately is because year is very easy to identify, right? Whereas the date will be a specific date of the financial statement, right? And financial statements are made at year end, right? Depending upon which part of the world you are in. For example, in India, financial year is end is on 31st March, right, of every year. Whereas if you talk about other countries like US, the financial year end is December, right? So depending upon which date is your last financial year date, you mentioned that. So let's say my historical data for the financial statement, depending on which model you're doing. If you're doing a business model in which you're trying to create a business plan, of course there will not be any historical data. There will be only projected data. But if you're doing an equity valuation model, an M&A model, LBO model, you will always have historical data, right? So let's say I mentioned 31st March 2016 as the first date of my historical data, right? Now, you don't want to keep on typing that through all the cells. So what you do is you take an edate function, you select your date which is the first date, and then create the next date, which is 12 months after this. And now you see that it actually turns out to be a number rather than a date. That's only a problem of formatting, nothing to worry. Okay. So what we're gonna do is first we're gonna just 17, we're just gonna drag it to the right, so that first we have the dates. So 16, 17, 18, 19, and then from, let's say, 20, 21, 22 is my forecasted data, right? So now what we can do is, once you have dragged in the dates, you can select the area, you can click on the number format and select short date, right? So now this will be my historical data, and let's say I can just keep on dragging for 3 years, which can be my forecasted data. Now this signifies that the number is a little too large to be displayed, so what you can do is just select and double click, right? So your date is now available. All right. Now you want to display only the year so that it's easy to identify, right? So just use the year function and just select the date and drag it, right? So the second part is done, wherein we are talking about only the year to be displayed, right? And above is the proper date, particular date that we are showing. Now it's not easy for a person to know which of these are historical data and which of these are forecasted data. So what you can do is either use a color code, but that's again very difficult to explain it to the person. You can use commonly used terminologies in the industry, which is to use A for actuals, that means historical, and E for estimated or forecasted data, right? So how do we change the formatting for that? Is to select these cells where you want to mention that these are actual data or historical data. Click on the number format and go to custom format. Okay. So if you go to more number formats, you will get a custom section, and you will see a zero which is written on here. So if you see in custom format, there are various kinds of custom formats available. We're gonna stick to first zero, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna put a double quote. Okay. uh, I mean, if however you want to show it, right? If you want to just directly show as A, you can just show it as A and press OK, and then the letter A will follow the number. Okay. If you want to give a little bit of space out there, or you want to put a dash out there, what you could do also is to select a dash. Okay. I'm just going to remove that space in between. So there you go. So this looks much more presentable rather than just the A directly happening after the number, right? For the forecast, you could select the cells and go to the same more number format section, go to custom and use the same zero, put a double quote, and then put a dash, and then put the capital E, so which will give estimated. Right? So now your user of the model can easily identify that, okay, these are actual numbers and these are estimated numbers, right? Very clearly you can identify, right? Now another thing about making templates is to make them aesthetically cleaner, right? So generally, at least when I used to do modeling, right, I used to stick to Arial format because it's much more legible, right? And try to keep consistent size of formats. You don't want to be using 11 on one sheet and then 12 on the other sheet, and using different kinds of formatting. You don't want to be using very fancy formats, right? Because you want the user of the model to focus on the objective of the model rather than focusing on the formatting, right? So you don't want to do too much creativity there, and you want to keep the fonts very decent size. I prefer about 9, because as soon as you open the model, even if you're zoomed at this level, it looks pretty decent, right? At this Arial 9, I think is perfect according to me, but you might differ, and that's completely up to you, right? You don't want to use too many loud colors as well, right? So you want to stick to very decent colors. Now if you want to give some aesthetics to this, you could use a bottom border, and just use maybe a thick bottom border, so you can clearly see that the date and the year is separated. Also what you could do is you could give a thick bottom border for the year number as well. So now you know where the person needs to focus, right? So since there's a double border out here, the person will directly see, okay, and this is the year, right? Very clearly, easy to identify, right? So that's the basic formatting we have done till now. And now what we're going to get into is, now you don't want the user of the model to scroll down and then he doesn't see the year. So what we can use now is the view ribbon. So you keep your cell just below 2016, go to the view ribbon, and you'll see freeze the window section, right? The window section of the view ribbon, and you'll see freeze panes, and just click on freeze panes. So what Excel will do is it will just create that intersection out here. So even if you go below, your models will be visible, and you can just just shift the header of the model just a little up, so that this workable space is not gone, right? So your date is done, your year is done, right? We have put in the formatting for actuals and estimated as well, right? Now the question arises of uh, you know what color code do we use, right? So let's start with some. I'm just going to make, you don't really need to know financial statement right now, just copy this so that you understand where so that I'm able to explain you what color to be used where, right? So I'm going to create a simple income statement out here, right? So revenue cogs, I'm going to create gross profit out here. Then I'm going to create let's say SG&A, and that's going to give me EBITDA, then DA, then EBIT, I, then EBT, then T, then PAT. All right. So let's say I created till here. Okay. Let's say I calculated till PAT. Okay. Profit after tax, and then I put in number of shares, right? And then I just put in the EPS. All right. So we have a simple pseudo, you can say a basic income statement out here, right? Now you have to understand, when you're dealing with historical data, right? Uh, these revenue numbers are not calculated. So you're basically just hard coding, right? So there are three kinds of data that we'll deal with. Right? One is the hard coded, and now we are talking about actuals, okay, historical. Either the data is hard coded, right? Either there's a calculation which is done, right? Or there is a forecast which you're doing. Okay? So hard coded, generally what we can do is try to keep it blue. Actuals you can keep it as black, okay, and forecast you can, or assumptions, forecast or assumptions, you can keep it as a red. So three color codes, nothing beyond this. So you don't want to make a colorful model with every section you're trying to highlight with a different color. Doesn't make sense. And these are standard colors which are used mostly across analysts. So hard coded blue, calculation black, forecast red. Okay, let's stick to that. Now let's say I'm just making numbers up, okay, so that get to see what it looks like. Okay, so let me just put in some numbers out here. Oops, I did the other way around. Let me just put one more zero out here. So I'm just going to populate random numbers. I don't want to think about numbers. I'm just using rand function, the random function, and I'm going to take the bottom as, let's say, 500 and the top as 2000. Okay, so now we have some hard-coded numbers here, right? Now after this, gross profit generally you will not hard code, right? So instead gross profit will be a calculation, right? So that will be revenue minus cost, right? Similarly, SG&A will be a hard-coded number. So let's say I create the SG&A number as 200 as the bottom and 1000 as the top. Okay, I'm just going to copy this, otherwise this numbers will keep on changing. And again, EBITDA is a calculation, which is gross profit minus SG&A. Depreciation will be again an assumption, right? Oh, sorry, a hard coded number. So 200, and let's say I take 500 as a, okay. Then interest, let's say I take it as 100 and 200 as the top number. Okay. And similarly, tax we can keep it as a calculation of 30%, right? Now, so you do you see why we needed this section 30%, right? So that we can write that 30% out here, right? And now if you see, this is a calculation, right? EBIT is a calculation, EBT is also a calculation. Even though you could have just copied this, but in modeling, when you're dealing with historical data, you tend to still do the calculation so that you know whether the calculation is actually happening correctly, right? Then 30% is of the tax is also a calculation, right? And then PAT is EBT minus tax, right? Number of shares will be obviously hard coded. So let's say we take, so I'm just going to keep it at a lower range. Now again, EPS will be a calculation, which will be PAT divided by the number of shares, right? So that gives me the EPS, right? Don't mind the numbers; it might be erratic because I'm just using, random number of shares just to prove a point. Okay. So now, if you see, this was the model, right? This was the sheet that he created. It's very difficult to understand where are the calculations happening and where are hard coded numbers. So you want to make this simpler, and that's why you want to use color coding, right? And also, if you realized, we have still kept this font size as 11. We want to stick to one type of font size, right? So I'm going to keep it as 9. Now see, it looks much more cleaner, and we also want to stick to the same font type, which is Arial, right? Although you might you can experiment with different also, but I tend to like Arial, because it's much more legible and looks more decent. Now see, if you want to show hard coded numbers, what you could do is you could just select the hard coded sections, right? So this was one section, which you could keep it as blue, dark blue preferably, so that's easy to identify. Then your cogs is again hard coded number, and your SG&A is a hard coded number, then your depreciation is a hard coded number, right? Your interest is a hard coded number. Hard coded means you just extracted it from an annual report and you just put it out here, right? Rest, if you see, number of shares is a hard coded number, right? Rest, every calculation is calculation, right? So calculation remains black, right? You don't have to make it bold or something, not required. Just keep it as simple, don't change any color, right? And EPS is also a calculation, so it's black. All right. Now, so that's your basic, forecast. Basic color coding for the actual numbers, right? We have not taken any assumptions here, so we will not be using red anyhow, right? Now, in the forecast also, the estimated number also, if you are going to do derive revenue from calculation, right, it's still going to be black. Okay. So if, let's say, I forecast my values, right? So let's say I say that my revenue is going to increase by 20%, right? So what I can do now is I can create a forecast section out here, and let's say I just gonna put a small underline out here so that it's visible, right? And I'm gonna take revenue, cogs, gross profit, whatever, right? Let's take all of them first, copy it and paste it down. And now we're gonna just calculate what was the growth in this area, and then we're going to just forecast it in the future. Okay, this is, I'm not teaching you financial forecasting right now. I'm just so that we derive some numbers out here. That's the reason why I'm doing it. Okay, so revenue, let's say we just calculate what exactly happened out here. Okay, and I'm going to do it for all the values, right? So since this is a calculation, we'll keep it as black. Okay, we don't want to change this. And now all the forecast, that the assumptions that we're going to take out here is going to be red. All right. So let's say I take an average of all these values and keep it constant for the near future. Okay. And let me just change the dollar sign to a column dollar sign so that I can just copy the same formula down. Okay. Now we're not going to be using all of them, but let's start with revenue first. So revenue is an assumption. So I'm saying that 6.9% is what the revenue is going to grow with. So since this is an assumption, I'm going to keep it as a red. Okay. COGS is again, I'm taking as 9% growth rate. But what I could do instead is, just to modify this calculation, what I'm trying to do is, let me find the percentage of COGS as a percentage of revenue. Right now, let me keep this as a calculation out here, right? And I've just taken an average out here, so I'm just going to keep it as a red. Okay, gross profit doesn't require any calculation, so any assumptions, so I'm just gonna skip that. SG&A also, I'm gonna find it as a percentage of revenue. Okay, this divided by revenue, there you go. And again, the average gets calculated towards the right. EBITDA is not a calculation, is not a, I mean, you won't really take an assumption for that. Depreciation, let's keep it as, again, the same value, right? Let's just keep it as a growth rather than anything else. Interest, we can do the same common size technique of dividing the interest over revenue. Okay, and this is not how we actually do it. Okay, I'm just trying to populate some number, that's why I'm doing it. EBIT doesn't require any calculation, any assumptions. Tax rate, we can just assume to be 30%. Okay, and PAT again doesn't require any assumptions, right? And the only thing which I will put in still is the number of shares. Okay, in the real model, you actually have to look at the annual report to find out uh, what the probable shareholding pattern will be. So I'm going to keep this as an average of all these 3 years, and I'm not going to change that much. So I have some numbers now to take, right? And these are all my assumptions. So I'm going to mark all of them as red. So now when you also open this model, let's say this is the model that you were referring to, you can clearly see these are hard-coded numbers, these are calculations, and these are actual, matrix, and these are your assumptions, right? And now when you try to, use the assumptions to grow a value, right? Right? Again, since it's a calculation, remember, you don't want to keep it as red, you want to keep it as black, because the assumptions are here. This is still a calculation, right? The COGS will be similar, revenue multiplied by the assumption, whatever the assumption is, right? So I'm going to just use a dollar sign and just skip the trouble. So I'm going to put a row dollar sign out here, so because most of the calculations are going to be based on revenue, right? And let's press enter. So my COGS are here, and you want to keep your decimal places to the minimum. Okay, you don't want a model which looks something like this. Okay, it's very unprofessional. So you want to keep as less decimal places as possible, right? And now gross profit is again a calculation, so just SG&A, we start with the same formula, right? So it automatically calculates, if you see, right? It's just one step down, right? Then EBITDA is this minus this. Again, depreciation will be revenue multiplied by the depreciation rate. I think we have taken a growth rate of depreciation. So let me just increase that value by 17 odd percent. Right? EBIT, revenue minus DA. Interest is again revenue multiplied by the interest rate. And again, I'm just reminding you again, please do not think that I'm trying to do modeling out here. I'm not actually doing financial modeling. I'm just trying to show you what a model looks like and what are the things that you need to keep in mind so that you understand color coding, formatting, fonts, right? Modeling is still far, far away. You will be learning all of these things, so don't have to worry much. Okay, so there you go. Number of shares also I linked from below. And now EPS is obviously PAT divided by this, right? So now again coming back to the same font, we need to keep the font same, right? So let's use Arial and 9. Okay, so the model looks very even. And if you see somewhere we have decimal places, somewhere we don't have, so let's just stick to not having any decimal places out here, at least at this stage. EPS you can keep it till 2 decimal places, which is fine. Even your forecasts, you can keep it to no percentages, no decimal places after that. You don't want to show fractions, right? EPS is fine. And now if you see, these are all calculations, right? So hardly any assumptions out here directly taken. So this part remains black, right? Number of shares, since it's not a calculation, it's an assumption, so we're going to keep it as red. And EPS is a calculation, so it remains as black. So now, more or less, now if you see, your formatting is more or less done, right? I'm just going to change the number of shares to a number format. Okay. And finally, we're going to put in the color code out here, just to mention that this is the color code that we are using, right? So we will say blue is actuals. Okay. And then you can just put a dash out here, and red is assumptions, and black is calculation. Okay, just try to make it slightly larger, and you can just put the color that you used so that it's very easy to identify, right? And just reduce the font size for this, not required to be very large. And in the second part, which is all data in millions, you can slightly reduce the font size first, and just write except, let's put a bracket and write except per share, right? Which means that your EPS is not in millions, so you're just mentioning that out here. Okay. And just slightly, yeah, I think now it's perfect. And try to take it a little above, right? And now more or less you're done. Now you can just first of all just highlight the places where you want the person to focus. So for example, pat, you want to put double brackets, so top and bottom borders will be available, right? So there you go, top and bottom borders. So your pat is highlighted, uh, and more than that I don't think so you should actually do much of your highlighting out here, and just keep the pat as a bold value, right? That's all. And your EPS maybe as a bold, because these are the two most important things that you want the user of the model to focus. That's why you have made it bold. And possibly if you want, you can also keep the particular name of that line item also as positive, right? Revenue and pat maybe. Yeah. So this is personal choice, but you know looks better, right? So your basic template is ready. Now let's put some, if you want to put some colors, you could obviously go and put some colors out here, right? But make sure to not use too bright colors. You can stick to some standard secondary colors. S- you know Something like this, right? And try to do not use unrelated colors too much. Like for example, if you're putting gray out here, then just don't put yellow, right? Although it can go, but then it's too loud. It looks like a kiddish model. It looks very kiddish. So either you keep it blank, right? So it's fine. If even if you keep it this way, is fine. Or you could just use very decent finance kind of colors. For example, just maybe this much. Also, one of the ways of use choosing colors is also the company's color, right? For example, if Reliance Industry is green, then you could put it as green, right? So not that green, maybe some lighter versions of green, right? And also one more thing that you want to do is you don't want to see all these grid lines, right? So last, what you could do is just go to view, uh, and if you see the show section, just click on grid lines. So now it looks decent, right? So that's how you create a financial analysis template, guys. So I started from the basic. I'm sorry if I tried to go pretty long on this, and extremely sorry if I went too technical. But don't focus on the technique. Just focus on the logic of using colors, templates, formatting, right? Columns. Why are you leaving columns out here? Also, one of the things I just forgot about mentioning that is to just color this line. Okay, just put a border to this line. So you can just put a right border to this. Let me see if I have it here. Right. So it's a clear distinction you get that okay, this is where the model calculation starts. So that's how you create a template, guys. Okay, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye bye.